This is DGMT's Learning Lunch, and I'm your host, Rahima Esop. The enablers of child and teen development are pretty simple if you think about it. Children need love, nutritious food, safety, and cognitive stimulation. Let's call that brain power. But in South Africa, these things are out of reach for many living in poverty. And to make matters worse, research shows that child development gains over the past 30 years are showing signs of reversal. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, more children are living in poverty, and there is some evidence that child mortality rates may be starting to go up. To stop us from going backwards, or to avoid continuing on a path of steady but very slow progress, we need to do things differently by accelerating action for children. This is the thinking behind the Hold My Hand Accelerator, a public-private collaboration that supports a national strategy for children and teenagers. It's based on international evidence that change can be fast-tracked when the president takes the lead, when all of society gets behind a national program, and when there's an organization that keeps driving that program forward, like an accelerator. So on today's episode, we explore the type of strategic thinking needed to galvanize different sectors of society behind a common vision, like getting behind children. I'm joined by Noxolo Gada, strategy lead for the Hold My Hand Accelerator, who will talk about how their initiative is thinking about building broad support for a common vision for children and teenagers. Our conversation will traverse different ways of strategic thinking, on the edge thinking neurally, and thinking exponentially. This conversation is both conceptual and practical for NGOs, social entrepreneurs, development practitioners, and anyone really interested in different modes of strategic thinking that guide how a project or venture is executed. Welcome, Nox. It's nice to have you here.
Hi, Rahima. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we get into the conceptual part of this conversation, Nox, let's start with understanding why the Hold My Hand Accelerator exists in the first place.
So the Hold My Hand Accelerator is an initiative that exists to really galvanize change for children. What's different about it, though, that I think is really the hallmark of it, is about including the whole of society. So it's not only just a brand or a campaign or programs, it's a combination of all these things that are anchored around children and teens being at the heart, and it serves as an interface for government, civil society, faith-based practitioners to all meet on the central idea that's backed by presidential leadership and a strategy called the National Strategy to Accelerate Action for Children, which we'll call the NSAAC.
Don't we already have a constitution, laws and policies that protect the rights of children already?
Yes, we do. We have a lot of those governance and policy frameworks in place, but this is the problem. That's where they end. We need to see these things in action. We need to see budgets allocated to it within government sector. We need to see those programs thriving. It's also the responsibility within the whole of society to bring the Constitution to life. We need to see private sector being focused in these areas, as well as government, civil society organizations and faith-based organizations. So really the accelerator is about getting things to action. And we've been able to identify through the NSAAC really catalytic areas, key priorities and key interventions where we put sort of the fork in the road and say, these are the 10 things we need to focus on and get behind in order to really begin to move the needle. And only then do we begin to believe we'll see the change at an outcomes level for real change for children and teens.
Why are we failing in implementation?
Well, these things are difficult, Rahima. Earlier in the introduction, you mentioned the important things we're wanting to get behind. All children need love, play, brain power. And those things sit across various disciplines, not only just in the academic sector, but mainly in implementation across government. They're across multiple government departments. You also find that there are multiple civil society organizations working in specific areas or overlapping. And so what we need to do, what we believe is an accelerator, is to combine all those efforts and really surface the shared value in order to galvanize the change and bring forward action.
So how is the accelerator aiming to do these things?
The accelerator is aiming to do it using three key things. One, really using presidential leadership. So being able to drive focus, awareness, and momentum through the leadership of the presidency. 2, it's around focusing on real priority areas, understanding the 10 things, which I mentioned in the NSAAC, that everyone has come together to agree upon. This has been a collaborative process, and so really beginning to focus on the levers for change across these 10 areas. And then 3 is to then look at how do we do this differently. And the accelerator is functioned in a way that begins to pull on those aspects using information, communications, smart program design that looks at not doing things again in the same way, but rather filling specific gaps programmatically and linking programs to each other that already exist. And then lastly, to mobilize resources across, as I'd mentioned, the various parties within civil society.
So the NSAAC, as you mentioned, has 10 priorities that it's really focused on and that the accelerator is getting behind. Let's now talk about the conceptual thinking behind how the accelerator operates in order to get behind those 10 things within the NSAAC. Tell me about the modes of strategic thinking that guide how the accelerator operates.
So the accelerator uses specific design principles to accelerate action. And there's 3 that have become the hallmark of how we see doing things differently, which has been thinking on the edge, leveraging neural networks, and also thinking exponentially.
Let's start with thinking on the edge, the one you mentioned first. I understand it as not duplicating what has been done before. It's about adding new value. Can you share examples of this from your work or other sectors that have used the thinking on the edge strategies?
Sure. So thinking on the edge really is about looking at the system for what it begins to offer. So it's taking a very appreciative inquiry or asset-based approach, which then begins to harness the good things that exist and begin to then surface additional value. So we've been working on the accelerator has been one of the catalytic interventions mentioned in the NSAAC, which is universal newborn hearing screening. And so a more linear way in approaching this could be, well, quite logically, one would argue, screen small babies where they're born. They're mostly born in facilities with healthcare workers, and so healthcare workers would do the screen, and that seems reasonable. However, there will be various limits to scaling such programs when we don't think about, well, how can we do this a little bit on the edge? And so what the accelerator begins to think through is then beginning to plot the specific areas. If we could do a specific change in this using a different workforce or using technology, how could we then unlock more value, which potentially then begins to impact reach and impact the outcomes we could see? And so we begin to think through, well, okay, of course, children are born in facilities, but what else do these communities have besides clinics? They also have day moms, they may have community healthcare workers, they may have mentor mothers, they may have other moms who have children who have profound hearing loss. And so we begin to see, as we begin to question the different networks at play and begin to see the various resilience structures in the communities, that there are various other ways one can begin to design programs that screen or support women with newborns, particularly in this case for screening of hearing loss. And so we start to think here around diversity within the workforce. We then think differently around how we would equip them based on their level of expertise or knowledge, and then also around, which tools they can use. If we start thinking around screening children with various support systems in place, such as a mother versus a healthcare worker, then there's different tools one would need based on the level of difficulty. And then technology becomes a really easy way to task shift or make things simple. And so by really thinking through the various existing systems at place and seeing communities not for what they don't have, but seeing communities for what they do have, such as these various support structures, then we can start to design programs very differently, which will have, we believe, greater impact. And most importantly, they'll be sustainable and the communities will see themselves in them. And that's what really begins to bring children in the heart of our communities.
That makes sense. So let's get into exponential thinking then. I understand it to be driven by a big central idea. So, what is the big idea driving the accelerator, and what levers are being used to realize this big idea?
The big idea around the accelerator is that all children reach their well-being and ultimately their full potential. And that is an idea that's a big idea. And we want people not only to understand cognitively, but the real crux here is that people begin to feel part of the idea and also have ownership of that idea. And so we believe with exponential thinking is around making sure that everyone has ownership of the idea and a sense of purpose in it, so that in their own sectors they begin to drive change within that. But we've begun to identify at least 4 levers within this exponential thinking, and we see that as being shared ownership by government as an important way to embed action, shared resources from existing networks. As I mentioned, what resources does the lady down the road have that she can share? What do churches have? What do community-based organizations have? As well as the use of technology, which I had mentioned. And now with the penetration of really basic low-tech technology, and then social solidarity, the influencers, the activists, all people in the community. And so we think if everyone, those 4 levers, can really take ownership of this idea and then within themselves have agency to ignite change in their own spheres, we begin to see exponential change that again unlocks impact.
So it's not about theoretically just buying into the idea, it's about creating an emotional connection with the idea and a sense of ownership.
Yes, it's that sense of ownership that unlocks agency, in which people themselves become agents of change within their own spheres. The accelerator is the node of energy that holds the need to catalyze and build momentum. But we do not have all the answers. We believe communities, people, we all together can solve for this. And so that sense of ownership is important for agency to then ignite, as we mentioned, the action that's needed.
Let's go into the third mode of thinking now, thinking neurally. Now, what comes to mind is a neural network inside the body. Is this way of thinking similar to the way neural networks work in the body with a nerve center and interconnected nodes? How does this way of thinking influence how the accelerator operates?
Yes, Rahima, that's a very good example. To extend that thinking, the body has these various nodes and many highways transferring ideas and energy to very peripheral parts of the body. And so the accelerator remains this node of energy, but really we believe that this can extend across various networks. And we believe as we engage with one aspect or one influencer or one neuron, the exchange begins to strengthen the connections not only within our network, but with the network of the fellow neuron. So essentially what that means, that with every connection, the exchange strengthens the relationship, and then you are also part of a peripheral network. And that then begins to create energy and a body of coexisting networks that are not managed by a central idea or a central energy source or a central neuron, but each neuron itself exchanges information, exchanges goods, exchanges support and collaborates, and therefore becomes really energized and self-sustaining.
Given what you've explained, Knox, about the conceptual modes of thinking that guide how the accelerator operates, tell me what this looks like in the day-to-day activities of the accelerator team, which I know is a small team.
Yes, these are very big ideas, and these have been able to be concretized with a very small team because of these design principles. And so, for example, our day-to-day within the accelerator is about engaging with people who are already doing the work. We do not see ourselves as experts in any of these things. There are experts who look at how children play, how children talk, the needs for brain power, and the various strategies that are aligned to the 10 key priorities of the NSAAC. And so what the accelerator does is to really become the node of connection, so driving these networks, and these networks cut across specific domains of influence or specific domains of knowledge, and we begin to then bridge those. So for example, we have built the Hold My Hand community. It is a network of 150 community organizations, and they are all working with children at the heart of the center, yes, but in various different ways. And so we're able to create connections between organizations that may work in play, others that may work in child protection, others that may work in teenagers, and really beginning to have an exchange in where communities can share knowledge and strengthen each other. And this thinking cuts across all aspects, how we look at programs and designing them. And I'd mention an example of how we're looking at universal newborn hearing screening, and it really does cut across other aspects, and as well as data information, being able to really debunk the idea that data must be academic, but rather taking practical data that creates a picture of what children are experiencing today and making it simple to digest, not only for the caregiver or the mom, but also for a community-based organization, also for government leaders and policy makers and decision makers. And so really trying to leverage these various networks to think through what information they may need to make the right decision. And then of course for communications, which is really important around building the shared idea, building the brand. And across these various ways, we've looked at how do we leverage the network, how do we think on the edge, and also how do we make sure that all those involved grab hold of the idea to be agents of change in their sector.
What are you and your team doing to mobilize different sectors of society in support of the National Strategy to Accelerate Action for Children, also known as the NSAAC?
Whilst the NSAAC was developed over a 2.5-year process in deep collaboration with the various sectors, and this process has now gotten to the point where the document has been finalized and it sits before Cabinet. The President mentioned it in his SONO address in the beginning of the year, which has great support for this becoming passed through Cabinet. Then the process the Accelerator has been supporting is the writing of this, the engagement of it with the various ministries, and now as well as the various organizations who work within the catalytic areas. And finally, once it passes through Cabinet, we'll be able to socialize the NSAAC, not only with the various ministries through portfolio committees, etc., as well as governments locally, and then we think most importantly the people on the ground, the community-based organizations, as well as the trade unions, as well as the faith-based organizations, really even private sector. Getting everyone behind the NSAAC is what the Accelerator seeks to do. And we do this by either one-on-one engagement, or we may do it through attending a workshop or conferences. We have our mobilization lead, Masuli, who was just on the field at various parenting workshops discussing this, or meeting with church groups discussing this. So there is a dual approach of doing it digitally. You may have seen our campaign, the Hold My Hand campaign, that really does promote some of the catalytic areas and the essence really of putting children forward. And then of course we have some real on-the-ground mobilization, and we really do believe, again, in a network approach. We may not be able to reach every corner of the country as being a small team, but we do believe through reaching community organizations and using those networks to really empower communities to understand NSAAC and what it means to them, then we'll be able to really begin to mobilize a network around the NSAAC and what the Accelerator stands for.
So getting behind the NSAAC means ensuring that everyone knows what the NSAAC is, how it affects them, and how they can support it, essentially. Knox, I want to get into what you've learned thus far about translating the conceptual frameworks into programmatic design and campaigns.
Well, I have learned that change takes time and one must be patient, but it is worth it. So in this process, and it's particularly known with exponential thinking, there's always that tension where you're almost ready to go and things align, but it really does take time to do things that are ready for scale. And so this is particularly around programs. Very often one might design a pilot that might work in a specific area, or there might be existing community-based organizations who are running programs in an area, but they need to scale, and being able to scale those is difficult because there's specific nuances that are successful at a local level, but challenges when you begin to scale. And so when you begin of thinking around exponential thinking and everyone owning the idea and being agents of change, there's a lot of diversity in the mix that is essential, but also requires a lot of agility to navigate. And so that has been one of the critical things in program design, thinking through how do we scale things we know have worked on the ground that may not have been designed for scale initially, or when you scale them, begin to lose the essence of what worked locally in a specific area, like context. In South Africa, that's particularly important because we have various environments, rural, sub-rural, we have metropolitan, urban communities, we have various types of caregivers, multi-generational households. A granny can be a caregiver, an aunt, a sister, a biological parent. And so really having to think through, who are the different people at place. Teachers even are important, particularly teachers and peers for adolescents. And so when we think of program design and exponential thinking, we have to really be thoughtful around how do we scale these, considering the magnitude of diversity, variation, and making this work in one community may not always translate to another. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means really having to take a step back and think through very systematically what are the leverage points and do all levers work in all places. And so really having to engage and go through, really patient work has been very, very important. But it does take time. It does take time. And then I think one other thing that I've learned that has been quite important to me, at least personally, is just agility, being able to pivot when one needs to pivot. And it's been a process with the accelerator, engaging and taking feedback from everybody, people in the private sector, people in the public sector, being really able to redefine one's idea. And I must say, when we engage with various parties, everyone wants to collaborate. Especially in the social development space, it's this idea isn't a difficult idea. There's no resistance to the idea, and there's high support to collaborate. And I must say, it's been incredible to see everyone wanting to get behind it. The challenge we face is the how. How do people collaborate? How do people collaborate with government? How do people collaborate with private sector? How do people collaborate sometimes even with each other? We find various civil society organizations down the road from each other, or churches not being plugged in. And so really having to take that feedback, pivot one's strategy and design to meet the real needs of people on the ground. And that has been something really challenging for us, but also really exciting to be able to get tangible feedback, apply, because again, going back to the ethos that the accelerator is not an all-knowing body. It is just a node of energy absorbing the feedback and wanting to design programs that fill the gap or link existing programs so that there's actual real change on the ground.
When I think about what the accelerator is trying to do to get a whole of society response, that isn't just a throwaway line. That is critical to the success of not only the NSAAC, but the work of the accelerator. And some social problems require that kind of whole of society response. I'm thinking about dealing with our country's waste problem, for instance. I'm thinking about crime. I'm thinking about gender-based violence. And now to ensure that all children and teenagers thrive and live up to their full potential, you need that whole of society approach. What have been the challenges and the quick wins that you've experienced thus far in trying to build that whole of society response?
I'll start with the challenges. I think some of the challenges we have faced has been how to do this differently. Many organizations have shared experiences of having been here before. To your previous question, are we not doing this? And so one of the biggest challenges, I think, has been really anchoring the accelerator as something different. which is true, but I think sometimes has been difficult for everyone to get behind and understand, and maybe to have to work past that resistance. And we are very open to engaging around that. And again, it's not resistance around the idea. I think it's resistance and previous disappointment and, despondency in having been in this place before. And what is so important, and I think this is the quick win, is that, the accelerator has the presidential leadership. It has the support at a very senior level to make this happen. And this isn't just another political statement. This isn't another political badge. This is real in how we're seeing engagements with the various departments, in how we're seeing commitment for this to be actualized, and that in itself is why the accelerator exists. That the presidency had said, because this is different, we need to have a node of energy, an accelerator that is going to move things ahead. And I think our very existence, which I think is really such a win for the country, that has said, we're going to acknowledge the things that have been difficult and actually focus an accelerator to try convene sectors together. And so I think that has been a really quick win, and a win that I think civil society can see themselves in, is that the accelerator isn't just sitting in a government building or is not sitting in an office. It is a network. We are just a small group doing the management of it, but actually join the network. The accelerator is an extension of, like we said, 150 plus civil society organizations who are all working together. And I think being part of something is a quick win. And it's a win that can maybe not solve every problem. And, the 10 priorities, they're not comprehensive, they are focused. But what it does mean is once you're able to be part of something like the accelerator, you're able to exchange within the network and share learnings within the network. And most importantly, if we can anchor in the minds of all people, I'm not even going to say organizations, all people who think children should be at the center, that they are agents of change, they within themselves can self-manage, and that's when we believe scalable change can take place. And so really, Rahima, I think, the critical challenge is also the critical win, that this is hard, has it done before, what do we do differently? The win is that there is momentum, there is commitment, there is the accelerator, and the accelerator is not just me and a few people, it's hopefully everybody listening, it's everyone who's wanting to participate. And that's what's different, that for the quick win is, South Africa is taking this seriously, and South Africa, the people of South Africa are given the opportunity to get behind something. And I think that's a win. Get involved, participate, and you can be an agent of change. And that's what inspires me to do this every day.
What are the milestones for the accelerator for 2025?
The key milestones for the accelerator for 2025 was to launch. And so we launched sort of late last year, and really to build this network, as I've been mentioning, because this is a critical part of the accelerator. It is also to have the national campaign supported and also well recognized. And so various channels, so on social media, attending various community engagements, really sharing the sense of ownership around the brand. I think that's a critical milestone for us. Also sharing data, but not, I think data tends to scare people. I think it's about sharing practical information, and that might be through policy brief or through technical reports. And so the team has been working on that, particularly around the core accelerator strategies that we are working on. And that is aligned to the NSAAC's 10 key priorities, but being able to take away the difficult lingo and make it simple. So anyone, a caregiver or a civil society organization leader, a church leader, can understand what this means for them and how they can apply it, as well as setting people up for success. So as we communicate, we can share information, and that can be shared within their network, but then linking them to programs, where there is opportunity to tell people what has been working in other programs. It's a great link, information we see as a link, but also, if there is programs in the area that we're able to link them to that. And so those have been really our sort of key milestones for this year, and just really excited about what momentum we'll be able to achieve. But I really can't iterate that enough. We're only achieving these by the support of everyone around us, not the accelerator's work alone.
And lastly, Knox, you've mentioned a few times the brand. And when we talk about the brand, we are talking about the Hold My Hand campaign. Just say a few words about the campaign and how it's galvanizing all of society.
Sure. The Hold My Hand campaign is a national campaign that is across all modes of information. So you're going to find it on your social media. You're going to find it on radio. We've got PSAs, and it's even some printed information. But essentially, it's a campaign that holds the idea around children being the heart, really every child achieving their full potential. And this is the vision of the NSAAC. So this brand and this campaign isn't just for the accelerator, but it's actually the brand of the NSAAC, so that everyone who gets behind this is saying yes to what's in the NSAAC. And so you'll begin to see the messaging of the campaign is really surrounded by that. But what's different about the Hold My Hand campaign, which is a really important part of the strategy having a brand, which is new, is that it's the voice of the child saying, come, hold my hand. Mr. President, hold my hand. Mum, hold my hand. Dad, hold my hand. Gogo, hold my hand. Come, let me lead you. And this campaign and brand isn't just for young children. It's also for our teenagers. And so the brand that interfaces with teens is called Kiredi, and they're also available to engage with caregivers of teenagers and teenagers directly. You'll find them on TikTok or social media. This campaign is really around the voice of all children, young children and teenagers, and them taking the lead to what they need.
Thanks, Knox. It's clear that the Hold My Hand accelerator is different, and that it thinks differently and it operates differently with a view to fast-tracking improvements in children's lives. It's like an atomic structure with a small core team, you included, interacting with a dynamic network of government, private and civil society actors. And now, over to you. Those listening to this podcast, using what you have heard today, you can try this reflective exercise. You'll need a pen and paper to write down these steps, or download the takeaway sheet from our website, dgmt.co.za, and go to the podcast section. Write down the following questions and spend some time reflecting on them by yourself, and then maybe share them with your colleagues. Question number 1. What is your organization's impact statement, and how are you designing your programs to be able to achieve that aim sustainably and at scale? Question number 2. In the work that you do, how can you support the National Strategy to Accelerate Action for Children, also known as the NSAAC? And question number 3. What networks are you or your organization part of, and how could these networks engage with the Hold My Hand Accelerator network? This is DGMT's Learning Lunch. Until next time.